Okay, this is grade 9. Today is May 12th, 2021. May 12th, thank you, Dane. And we're reviewing a kind of a reach back of everything so far that we've covered in the year, which is not a lot because we had an abridged curriculum. Thank you. Thank you for the 12. So our first question here, if you want to press pause and try this, if you're practicing it, just press pause now and give these a go, and then fast forward to the questions you want the answers, and you can see them. Our first question is a order of operations question involving fractions. We have a mixed fraction, and we have two operations. The operations here, we have addition, and we have division. Now, according to BEDMAS, we have to do division first, which will mean I'm going to keep the 2 1/3. I like working with improper fractions always, so I'm just going to keep it like that. Plus, whatever this happens to work out to be is what I'm going to add on to 7/3. The easiest way to do division, we learned, is to keep the first fraction, change to multiplication, and use the reciprocal of -3. The reciprocal of -3 is 1 over -3, or just a -3rd. And when I multiply that out, I'm going to get 4/15ths, but they're going to be negative. So I'm going to put that in brackets and put negative. I now have the addition of these two. When adding any fractions, you need a common denominator. So this would be 35/15ths plus -4/15ths. Keep your denominator and add your numerators. Final answer will be 31/15ths, which is 2 1/15. Our second question gives us two square roots, one in decimal form and one in fraction form. And remember, when in decimal form it says what number multiplied by itself is 0.09. Now we know that the answer is going to be 3, but we don't know if it's going to be 0.3 times 0.3 or if it's going to be 0.03 times 0.03. Most people think it's this one because it looks like that times this would be the correct answer. But if you remember back to grade 4 or 5 when you learned multiplication, if I was to drop these decimals and just multiply 3 by 3, I'd get 9. I have one decimal place here, I have one decimal place here, which means in my answer, I'm going to have two decimal places. So 0.3 times 0.3, or 3/10 times 3/10, if you want to think of it in fractions, is going to be 9/100ths, right? Which is what this number is here. So the answer is 3/10. So square root of this is going to become 3/10 plus the square root of a mixed fraction. We need to say what fraction multiplied by itself is 3/16. Since we can't do it in mixed fraction, we're going to use improper. The improper fraction is 49/16. Numerator is 7. Denominator is 4. So therefore, the square root of 3 1/16 is 7/4. So now we have a difficult decision to make. Do I want to use just decimals or do I want to use just fractions? Since it's up to you what you use, it's probably easiest to use decimals. And this number is 1 3/4, which means it's 1.75. So it's probably easier in simplifying your answer to do this question. Now, how many of you use fractions? Anyone use fractions? Fractions are fine. It's no problem. But obviously you can see how this is much easier to do because your answer is 2.05, right? So your answer is 2.05. Or if you had it as a fraction, it would be 2 500ths, which would be 1/20th, I think, right? 2 1/20th. Your next question has a string of exponential forms that are either adding together or subtracting. And then finally, you take that sum of all of those terms and then divide it by 2 to the exponent of 1. So if I think about this term, anything to exponent of 0 we learned has a standard form of 1 plus 5 squared, which is 25. Take away -3 squared means -3 multiplied by itself, which is +9, plus, because the exponent of 2 is not in brackets, that is the opposite of 4 squared, which is -16. Okay? So I'm going to quickly change these all to addition. When instead of subtracting, I'm going to add by the opposite. And now I'm simply going to gather like terms. A -9 and a -16, what does that make? -25. -25 and a +25 makes 0. So my numerator, when simplified, will simply become 1. And if I think of that denominator, Any base to an exponent of 1 is just the base itself. So therefore, the answer is a half. Or if you wanted to write it as a decimal, you can write it as 0.5. Where it's key flip change? Right here? You didn't have to. You could have taken away a positive 9. It's the same thing. Taking away a positive 9 is the same thing as adding a negative 9. Our next question is the addition and subtraction of polynomials. So another way to say this is simply gathering like terms. The only thing we have to be conscientious of is that we have a subtraction here, which we learned the easiest way to do it is change it to addition. And each term in the polynomial that you're subtracting can become its opposite. So now that you're gathering like terms, gather your highest degree terms first, which is your x squared. That's 12x squared. Your 3x and your 3x is 6x. And a negative 5x makes it just 1x or just plus x. And a negative 4 and a negative 3 and a negative 1 makes negative 8. Now Zoe asked me, is that as far as we need to go or can you go further? And the answer is you can't go farther than that because that is a trinomial, but there are no like terms, so that's as simplified as you can get. Your next question is actually from grade 8, and the reason why I included this is because the grade 8s at this time of year are currently working on it, so I figured it was. So this is a grade 8 question. So the first thing says, as a fraction, it's 1 over 500. Now the easiest way to change a fraction to a decimal is by doing what, Riley? What's the easiest way? The numerator divided by the denominator will always give you your decimal. So this is 0.002. Now remember, percentages are always fractions out of 100, right? Are always representing fractions out of 100. So there's two ways you could do this. You could interpret this as being 0.2%, or if you want to get real fancy, 1/5 of a percent. It's less than 1%. But the easiest way to do it would be to take your fraction that you do know and make it into an equivalent fraction out of 100. You would do so by dividing both by 5, and you would get 0.2 out of 100, which is 0.2%, or 2/10 of a percent, which in lowest terms is 1/5 of a percent. So both of your answers for that are valid. Now the next one, I'll guarantee you over half of you had it wrong. What is 1.5 as a percentage? So if we think about 1.5, this is 1, as a fraction, it's 1 and 5/10, right? So if I look at that as a fraction only, it's 1 and 5/10, or if you wanted to write it as, in lowest terms, you could go 1.5, all right? But the difficulty is percentages, again, just to reiterate, are always fractions out of 100, and both of those fractions I have denominators of 10 and 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this one, but instead of using it as a mixed fraction, I'm going to make it 15/10, okay? And 15/10 is equal to what out of 100? 150. Boys, if you guys could stop for a second, you're distracting me. So once we have it like that, we know that 15/10 is equal to 150 over 100. So therefore, 1.5 actually represents 150%. You forget it? The next one is 20.5%. Now our starting point is to think of it not with a fraction component to it, but just rewrite it like that to start. That's the first thing you should do. And the reason why you do that is because when I make my fraction, it's real easy to make a fraction out of 100, and therefore it's real easy to write an equivalent fraction that doesn't have a decimal, right? So if 20.5% is 20.5 out of 100, then an equivalent fraction of that by multiplying both numerator and denominator by 10 would be 205 thousandths. Now that's important for the very reason that if I read it as 205 thousandths, I can write it as a decimal as 205 thousandths as well, right? Now it doesn't say lowest term fraction for the fraction, so if you reduce 205 thousandths to lowest terms, you'd have 41/200ths, right? I think. Right? If you wanted to reduce 205 out of 1,000 to lowest terms, both are divisible by 5, and you'd end up with 41/200ths. Our next question is the multiplication and division. So we have the multiplication of the trinomial x squared minus 3x plus 2, and we're multiplying that trinomial by 2x. In order to do that, we just need distributive property. We're going to end up with, if we think about just this first part, 2x multiplied by x squared. It is 2 multiplied by x, that's what 2x is, multiplied by x, which is what x squared is. So if we think about 2x as being this, and I think about x squared as being this, then it makes sense that the multiplication of those two becomes 2x cubed, right? 2 times x times x times x. Plus or minus 2x multiplied by negative 3x will be negative 6x squared. And 2x multiplied by 2 will be a positive 4x. So all of that will be divided by 2. Okay? This is where it gets complicated. All right. What is 2x cubed divided by 4? What is the first one? So we're going to actually do division distributive property. What is 2x cubed divided by 4? It is a half an x cubed. Correct. Because you're simply dividing your coefficients. Minus, what is negative 6x squared divided by 4? Negative 1.5 x squared. And finally, what is 4x divided by 4? It is just x. And as Zoe will tell you, once you get down to that spot there, you can't simplify it any further because you have a trinomial with no like terms remaining. So that's your answer. Your next question is an algebra question. 2 ways to do it. How many of you multiply both sides by 15? Anybody? Possible to do. I'm not going to do that. I know it's pretty simple, so I'm just going to subtract a fifth from both sides to get rid of my constant. A third of x is equal to 2 fifteenths minus 3 fifteenths will be negative 1 fifteenths. Once we get it to there, I'm going to multiply both sides by 3, which gives me x is equal to negative 3 fifteenths, which in lowest terms is negative 1/5. Your next question is another one similar to that. First step is to multiply both sides by 2. Did anyone multiply both sides by 10? You can do that. It's no problem. I'm just going to multiply both sides by 2 and see what happens. X plus 1 equals 6/5. Is everyone okay with that? Or instead of 6/5, what could I say? 1 and 1/5. And here's why I'm going to say it, because now I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And x equals just a fifth. Obviously, multiplying both sides by 10 would have worked too, so it doesn't matter. But hopefully, that's the same number. Yeah, 0.2 is the same thing. That's right. Yeah. It wouldn't work because you wouldn't. Yeah, you would, but it wouldn't be helpful. If you multiply both sides by 5, the problem is multiplying this here by 5 doesn't get rid of anything. It just makes it more complicated. Ah, well, if you're smart. And our last question says, how many lines of symmetry? The answer is there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6. There are 6 lines of symmetry. What's the order of rotation? It appears itself as you rotate it 6 times, so the order is 6, and the angle of rotation is 360 degrees divided by 6, which is 60 degrees.